And while the IPL makes a lot of noise, the rest of the cricket world is quietly counting down to the T20 World Cup and the English summer. Welcome to the shiny side. I'm your host, Farees, and we have with us today, for the first time, Lawrence Booth. Welcome to the show, Lawrence.
Thanks, Farees. Thank you for having me.
Lawrence, to introduce Lawrence, he's, of course, is the editor of the WIsden Cricketers Almanac for, I think, 10 plus years, I believe. But he's also, again, a prominent journalist. He's with the Daily Mail, I believe, currently, and been authored or co-authored about 19 odd books. The most recent one being Bazball, which I'm still trying to get my hands on, by the way, but it's not available in Pakistan so far, so I need to work on that. But it's a pleasure having you on the show for the first time, Lawrence. To kick things off, unless you're deep into the IPL, it's probably a rare slow period for you, I imagine, as a cricket journalist.
Yes, it is. It's we're in England. We're waiting for the arrival of Pakistan for 4 T20 games in late May. That's a warm-up for both sides for the T20 World Cup in the Caribbean, which I'm going to. But WIsden was launched a couple of weeks ago. That's always a busy time for me. And then, twiddling our thumbs a bit, watching a bit of county cricket, but waiting for the international stuff to start.
Okay, good stuff. So I guess we'll get right into it, right? So there's a bunch of stuff here I want to talk about. Of course, there's the latest edition of the WIsden Cricketers Almanac that just came out last month. We want to talk about how that fits into today's world. I want to talk about the upcoming T20 World Cup, and if there's time, talk about Bazball. But I think we have to start off with something which, so with the Almanac, right, I find the editor's notes super interesting always, and this time around, you kind of went straight to about a specific point where you spoke about the ICC redistribution of funds. Now, India is now getting 39% roughly of ICC money, and you actually wrote quite, again, explained it really well in your note, but for the sake of our viewers, can you just quickly talk about what has changed and why that matters?
Yes, so essentially, it was the lead item in the editor's notes. I thought it was probably the most important issue in world cricket at the moment. The ICC decided last year to redistribute their central funds, the funds that they get from broadcasting deals for the tournaments they host, World Cups essentially. And India's share of that pie went up from about 25% to about 38, 39%. They pick up essentially about $230 million from that share. Now, the next biggest percentage is something like 6 or 7%, England and Australia. Pakistan are actually fourth in that list, 5.75%, which is 34.5 million US, or was when that calculation was made. So my argument was that this is an unfair redistribution. Now, no one doubts that India bring most of the money into global cricket. That is quite clear. Without India propping up the global market, we wouldn't be where we are. However, my argument is that $230 million is loose change for them, given that the kind of money they operate in. They sold the streaming and TV rights for the IPL 2 years ago for $6 billion. They sold the rights to the Women Premier League franchises not so long ago for 575 million. So you can see that 230 million won't do a lot for Indian cricket, won't move the dial. Whereas if you went to a team like West Indies, for example, I talk about them in the editor's notes, their annual turnover is 50 million. Their percentage of the pie, the ICC pie, is about 27, 28 million. They need the money. And world cricket needs not just a strong West Indies, but a strong Pakistan, Sri Lanka, South Africa, New Zealand, all the teams that are in danger of being left behind. So I essentially call for a fairer distribution of funds.
And then if you dive into the numbers, right? So like you said, India, that money is loose change. But even the smaller percentages going to West Indies, even Pakistan for that matter, they account for a significant chunk of their total turnover, right? So, yeah, I think, and I guess you've made your fair point, right? But I think the other factor is I get that, and this is my personal view, not sure if you agree, a lot of the money comes from India, sure, but the money comes in because India is competing with a comparative New Zealand or West Indies or Pakistan or South Africa. Pakistan not so much, but you know what I mean. And if those other teams become weaker, there may be less value in having a strong Indian side, right? Because who are they going to play? So India may become stronger, and sure, the money comes from there, but the money comes to watch India play other teams. And if those teams do not compete, then where do we go with that?
Sure, and also you look at the IPL, which is reliant to a degree on overseas stars. They love to be able to say that the IPL is the dominant T20 league in the world. If we create a scenario where it's not worth athletes' while to become cricketers in these other countries, then cricket will wither on the vine. And Test cricket in particular, I mean, that's one of my main concerns, is that white ball cricket is thriving in many ways, though of course the white ball franchise market is in danger of growing out of control. We don't know exactly where that's heading, but Test cricket is being forgotten about in some countries. South Africa famously sent a third string side to New Zealand recently because all their best players were contracted to play in the SA20, which is another IPL-backed tournament. The IPL have got a lot of these proxy tournaments around the world now, and Indian cricket is sort of my argument with Indian cricket has always been it's great that they've got the power, but with it they should exercise responsibility. And I hear sometimes that, well, England and Australia mismanaged the game back in the day when they had the veto at ICC level. That was certainly the case, but that two wrongs don't make a right. That doesn't then give India the right to sort of bully other nations in the way that England and Australia used to do. So I ask for a kind of socialism, for a fairness, for something where the rich prop up the poor, essentially, and Test cricket will be able to continue.
So, you talk about Test cricket. So let's come to Test cricket for a little bit, right? Because it seems like every series, every game is a referendum for whether Test cricket matters or not, right? Everyone talks about how this is amazing for Test cricket and it's saving Test cricket. I've been hearing for the last 20 or 30 years, Test cricket's in trouble. Is it really in trouble?
I think more so than it ever has been. I mean, you're right that we're always prophesying the death of Test cricket. I think we're now at a stage where the franchise market is so dominant and still growing. We don't know what's going to happen in Saudi Arabia, for example. The ILT20 is growing. Other nations want to get involved in Major League Cricket in America. All these competitions have offered players new possibilities to earn money. And if the test sort of pot, if you like, is not big enough, then boards won't be able to pay their players enough to stay on as red ball cricket. It's all very well saying that the best form of cricket is Test cricket, and Administrator is saying that they value the primacy of the 5-day format, but those words aren't being backed up by deeds. It depends what kind of game we want. Look, if we don't want Test cricket, then we're going about it the right way.
Yeah.
But if we do want a balanced game, if we want T20 to subsidise, if you like, Test cricket, then there must surely be a way of doing it. There are lots of bright business people in cricket at the moment who should be able to put their heads together and sort something out.
My issue with that approach is I feel like in the short term, T20 can subsidize Test cricket, sure, but I think not enough is being done to increase the value of Test cricket, make it more valuable for the audience, right? There's a bunch of different things that can be done, but I feel like the only argument here is, okay, fine, we're making so much money with white ball, let's write a small check to Test cricket to keep it alive. But that'll only keep us going for maybe a decade or two, right? But you really need to figure out how to make it more interesting for the viewer.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I do propose elsewhere in the editor's notes that if teams want, they should be able to stage 4-day test matches. And that would allow, for example, so at the moment, I would argue that one of the banes of Test cricket is the 2-match series. It goes 1-1 and you want a decider. Now, if you offered boards the opportunity to stage 3 4-day games, so 12 days as opposed to 10 days, they might be tempted to do that. The cricket would have to be faster paced, I think, because unless it would all be draws otherwise. And that's where we may come on to Bazball later. But if other teams decided to take a leaf out of England's book, who knows? We've got to try something a bit different because the way it's going isn't working.
Yeah. Okay. I think moving on to perhaps happier stuff. There's a T20 World Cup coming up again. I mean, they keep coming thick and fast, but it's great though. And you'll be going to the West Indies, like you said. How would you say now? Of course, it's got to the point now, which is I think a big achievement, that England, anything less than a semi-final spot, you consider like they haven't performed, right? But how is the England side looking to you? And if you have a quick look, it seems like they're very smartly and very well they've regenerated the batting order. We have 3 fresh faces with Will Jacks, with Phil Salt as well, and Harry Brook is kind of new as well in the top 5, right? Having said that, the bowling looks like it's pretty much the same guys from 2019, perhaps. So how do you see the side overall?
Well, they need a good tournament after their disastrous 50-over World Cup in India. And I think they hung on to some of the old players too long. I mean, Moeen Ali said it himself, though Moeen is still in the squad as the vice captain. You're right. I think the openers, Malan and Bairstow didn't gel as a pairing in India. I mean, Malan had a couple of decent innings. I think Jacks and Salt are precisely the kinds of guys they should have played at the 50-over World Cup. They weren't daring enough. So it'll be interesting to see how they go. You're right about the bowling. I am slightly worried about the bowling. I mean, Reece Topley, if he stays fit, that would be great. He was very unlucky with breaking a finger against Bangladesh in the second game of England's 50-over World Cup. But they need a good one. Otherwise, there are questions to be answered by Jos Buttler and Matthew Mott, the captain and coach, who they're still in credit because they still hold the T20 World Cup. But the 50-over effort was so poor that if they have another disaster, then they could be out of a job.
Yeah, and like you said, three of the quicks they have are essentially serious injury concerns, right? Jofra Archer, Mark Wood, and Topley as well. So that'd probably be a big factor. Um, Moving on towards closer to home for me, towards Pakistan, right? So Pakistan's somehow the talk is the standard mercurial stuff, etc., etc. Having said that, I think in T20s we've been pretty consistently making it to the top four. Played the final last time against England. How do you see Pakistan score from where you are? And of course, they're England. They'll be in England soon as well, so you get to see them up front.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I mean, you know, I don't want to use the word mercurial, but they can beat anyone on their day. They're seventh in the rankings at the moment, which is a bit of a concern. You know, it's usually the case that a winner of a World Cup is probably in the top three of the rankings going into the tournament. T20 is a more volatile format than ODIs. I mean, they're basically the last year they've basically only really been playing New Zealand in T20. I think they've had about 15 T20s or 13 or 14 of the couple of rained off.
New Zealand is still paying for the tour pullout they did a couple of years ago, I think.
Right, yeah. And and I think the two home series are both drawn 2-2,
Yes.
which, you know, looking at Pakistan, you wouldn't say they're an absolute banker for the semi-finals, but they could get there. You know, they could easily have won the last one in Australia had Stokes not played that innings in the final. So, and then they've got some terrific players. I mean, they seem to have moved away from the Babar Azam Mohammad Rizwan opening pairing, which I think is probably a good thing.
Which is my next question. So, like, there's a lot of criticism in Pakistan about whether there's place for two anchors in a T20 batting lineup. We split them up, but essentially sometimes you lose time early on, and then they're batting together again. So, what's your take on though having two guys like them in the top four?
I'd say it's very old-fashioned. I don't think you should have any anchor in a T20 lineup. I know in the IPL at the moment, you know, they've gone six mad. It's partly because the impact sub has given the top seven license to hit out. But I still think some of that will spill over into the World Cup. It depends on conditions. You know, pitches may be slower. We may have to recalibrate what we think a total is. But I think Pakistan have been a bit old-fashioned in that respect. India do it a bit themselves with Rohit and Virat Kohli, who escapes a lot of criticism because of who he is. But you know, his T20 strike rate is not as good as it might be when you've got guys like Jaiswal and Surya Kumar Yadav and these guys. So I don't think there's room for two anchors in the top four. I'm not even sure there's room for one anchor.
Yeah, I think with Pakistan, the only interesting thing I see is if I look at the schedule in the Super 8s, we are scheduled, provided everybody goes to plan, we're likely to play England, West Indies, and South Africa. Three teams that could potentially struggle against quality spin. And I feel like if tracks are slow, as people are assuming they might be, that might just kind of give us enough perhaps to win two out of those and go ahead. But again, there's also a first round to go through first.
Well, there is. I mean, most of the good teams should get through that. But I mean, you know, England were in the West Indies for a T20 series before Christmas. They lost 3-2, but one of the things they took away from it was how left arm spin in particular was useful. These guys sort of spearing the ball into the slow pitches. Moti does it very well. Akil Hussain. So they picked Tom Hartley, for example, because they want a left arm, and he's quite inexperienced at that level. So it'll be interesting to see how Pakistan have Imad Wasim back, don't they? Who you'd think would be perfect for West Indian conditions.
And a lot of success in the CPL as well for him in the last 2-3 years.
They've got a chance. There's no doubt about that. And Shaheen Shah Afridi is still. You still back him to break through in the first over of any innings because it swings the new ball with his left arm angle. So they've got the players for sure.
And you touched upon India. So my view on India is that, tell me if you agree, but they showcase the best talent in the world, especially with the bat in the IPL, and then they go back to select the same 10 guys again and again. It seems like they're leaving a lot out there. I'm not sure if you agree with that overall assessment.
Yeah, I do. I think they've always been quite conservative in their selection, despite having something, you know, a galaxy of glittering young stars. I mean, since the IPL began in 2008, they've not won the T20 World Cup, and that should be a bit of a sobering statistic for them. The last T20 World Cup in Australia that England won, the semi-final, they were plainly under par when they batted first. They pushed it around for 170, and England won by 10 wickets. That should have been a moment for Indian cricket to stop and go, hang on, we're not doing this the right way. I think the problem partly is that there's a sort of social hierarchy issue going on where no one was big enough to drop Virat Kohli and possibly Rohit Sharma, because they've got guys like Jaiswal, Pant is back, obviously, and Surya Kumar Yadav. Those three could destroy you. And it seems strange to talk about Kohli and Rohit in a different category because they're great players in their own right.
Yeah.
Are they the guys who are going to consistently win you T20 matches under pressure? We will see. We will see. Maybe they'll surprise us.
One structural issue I see with their side is they have four guys in the top four who are playing for sure. There's Sky, there's Rohit, Kohli, and now Jaiswal, none of whom can bowl a single over. So it makes it really hard to balance the side. And that was something which I think, and the fact that they've gone with an impact player rule, they have seen even less options for that in the IPL this time around.
Well, that's probably how helpful that will be to them going into the World Cup remains to be seen. I should think they'll bat largely the same way. And don't forget that someone like Jadeja will be suited to conditions out there. Kuldeep Yadav had a very good 50 over World Cup, tormented England towards the end of the Test series there recently. You know, they've still got some great players. I mean, it'd be foolish to write them off. But I just think that if they don't win, and the same for the same reason they haven't won recent T20 World Cups, then there'll be questions to answer.
Yeah, I think Matt Froller made a point on some show I was listening to recently where they asked him, do you think they'll do away with the impact player rule? And he said, if anything, the way things are, they'll probably bring the impact player rule into international cricket as well. So they don't need an all-rounder anymore then. So who knows?
Right. Well, definitely all-rounder, yeah.
But I guess before we finish up on the T20 World Cup, if you had to pick four for the semis, and don't try to think you're talking to a Pakistani audience so you can say anything.
No, sure. I think I'd pick Australia. Always seem to be there. I think West Indies because they've got so many big six hitters and they know those conditions really well. I think South Africa, who will be disappointed at how they didn't turn their excellent batting in the 50 over World Cup into a place in the final. They froze a bit in the semi-final against Australia at Eden Gardens. And I'd probably say India. I put India above England, I think. Despite what I've just said, the question is, can they do it under pressure in a big knockout match, a semi or a final?
Okay, interesting. And I guess moving on quickly towards the latest edition of the WIsden Almanac, right? So you had cricketers of the year this time around was Stark, Khwaja, Wood, Harry Brook, and Nat Sivabrand, of course. How challenging was the pick this time, given the incredible summer we had last year? And were there any ones who got really close but didn't make it?
Yeah, it's always challenging. I think you were trying to list the five there, and Ashley Gardner got in as the five. Nat Sivabrand was the leading cricketer in the world, slightly different, and Pat Cummins was the leading male cricketer in the world. So, but it is always tricky. I mean, to remind, I don't know how familiar Pakistani viewers are with the almanac, but the award is based on the emphasis on the previous English summer, and you can't have been chosen more than once. So we're not picking the best five players from that summer. We're picking from those two criteria, which is why you might get some names that people go, oh, hang on, why is that person in there? But it is always tricky. Travis Head came close. He played the match-winning innings in the final of the World Test Championship. His Ashes batting slightly fell away, which is what counted against him in the end. And he did win our new Wisden Trophy, which is awarded to the best Test performance of the year. So he got some recognition for his 163. It was an interesting one. Khawaja, batted slowly but scored a lot of runs. And he was like the anti-Bazballer, really, in that series. Harry Brook didn't score 100, but he played big roles in both England's wins in the Ashes. Mark Wood only played 3 tests, but he changed the mood of the Ashes. You're looking at not just the statistics, but the influence on the summer.
That morning of the 3rd test was incredible, right? Day one.
Absolutely. He was central to it. He yorked Khawaja leg stump, and Khawaja, no one would be able to get Khawaja out. And that changed the whole vibe of the Ashes. So, it's nice to be able to sort of recognise those things as well as, pure numbers of runs and wickets.
And so, you mentioned that this is meant to be the English summer, right? And growing up in the 90s, I would read this in the newspaper and wonder why X was there and why wasn't there. And clearly, I got to the point where I realized what it's meant to be. Now, obviously, this is how it's worked for close to 100 years or so. How do you see the place of the almanac today in today's world in what is no longer England-dominated cricket world, if I can call it that? And do you think it's something that belongs to cricket, or is it more about something that belongs to English cricket? How do you see that today? And as the editor, this is something you probably drive to an extent.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, they have tried Wisden Almanacs in both Australia and India, and they never got beyond about 7 or 8 editions in each one because it didn't sell enough. And that was quite interesting. I do think it's quite an English concept. It's hard to just to take Wisden and transplant it into another country because you don't have the history there. you know, that you'd be starting from scratch essentially. And part of WIsden's charm is people like to collect it. It goes back to 1864. So it is, unfortunately, it is quite an English idea, but we do cover international cricket. We cover cricket from all the international cricket from the previous year. So if you wanted to read up about Pakistan, you'd be a piece by Usman Samiuddin, for example, and we have reports from all the Pakistan games. So, you know, we cover international cricket as broadly as anyone. It's just that we are Anglo-centric because that is where 95% of our readers are. I mean, what's the role of an almanac in today's internet savvy world? It's harder because, you know, the web can update statistics by the second. We get one crack at it a year, so we have to be a bit clever about how we position ourselves. Some people have called us the conscience of cricket, so we have to try and make a splash with our opinions and our comment. And interesting that you asked me. You started by asking me about the editor's notes. Often, what I write in the editor's notes makes international news, and that says something about WIsden's standing, I think, in the world game. And if I wrote the same thing in the Daily Mail, it'll probably be ignored. If I write it in WIsden, it means something. So as long as it still has a name round the world, I'll be happy, and we will never neglect international cricket.
It's fascinating, right? Because as someone who follows cricket, I'm very aware of it, and I also follow it, and I have a few. Having said that, it doesn't really make headlines in Pakistan or India typically, but obviously in England, perhaps somebody in Australia, it's a very different story. I guess before we wrap up, and I'm very conscious of how much time you've given us, I can see Bazball, the book co-authored by you, lying in your background very conveniently. So nice cover with Ben Stokes standing there. There's a ton of questions I can ask you about the book and Bazball, which you could probably ask a million times, but I want to kind of take a different idea, right? So I think you talk in a bunch of, I've read and heard about how it's essentially a mindset that allows people to free in a certain manner. I guess my question for you is, let's say England beat India at home, win the Ashes, Baz is the new king of the world, and then Baz is up for grabs for other parts of the world. Let's say if India wants to hire him as a coach or Pakistan wants to bring him in. Do you think Bazball is very specific to the English environment? Are there reasons why it worked there, or would it also work transplanted in a country like India or Pakistan, for example?
I think it'd be harder in India than Pakistan. I mean, Pakistan started scoring quite quickly against Sri Lanka, didn't they, last year? The Pakistan way, whatever, and they'd clearly been affected by the visit of England sort of 8 months earlier. I think what happened with England was, or is happening, is that Stokes and McCullum see the game in exactly the same way. And they both decided that having won one test out of 17 under Joe Root, that they had nothing to lose. Test cricket's supposed to be fun. They both are attacking kinds of guys, and they're very strong with their messaging. You know, it'll be interesting to see what happens to England when Stokes and McCullum move on, because no matter how much their successors say that they want to carry on playing in that way, unless they can absolutely convey that message without any doubts creeping into the dressing room, England won't be the same team. So look, India don't need to play differently because they have a template. You know, they have great spinners and they can produce pitches to suit them. I think Pakistan are probably still trying to work out what their method is a bit, and it'd be interesting to see if they continue with that, the Pakistan way, or whatever you want to call it. Australia don't need to change their game because they have something that suits them. England, it worked for England because they had nothing to lose and they had to do something different. They had to try something different.
Probably because they had nothing to lose, and they had incredible white ball talent with the shots in the game to actually play in that manner.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
good stuff, Lawrence. I think thank you for being on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Farees. I've enjoyed it. Could have talked more about Bazball.
Yeah, we should. And we would love to have you again at some point in the summer. For those of you watching, if you have a view on whether Bazball will work in India or Pakistan, please leave a comment. Also talk about T20 World Cup, who you think your top 4 are likely to be. And we'll be back with some more content for you. In the meantime, stay tuned to The Shiny Side.